Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. You might want to pull up a chair, and you might also want to have some smelling salts. You know, those things before you pass out. Sniff them so you don't pass out. Boy, do I have a spin off the road for you. I can hardly believe this, and I'm still processing it. I was finishing up the show, and I thought, well, we'll finish up this show about Tartaria today. We'll talk about those photos and that kind of stuff. Well, before we get to that, Sassoon. We last left off with Sassoon, you know, leaving Baghdad and heading into India. It gets very interesting from there. I think the intent was this: Sassoon was going to spread Jews all over the world, a specific kind of Jews, the Zionist. So Sassoon, with his opium trade and stuff, actually set off a firestorm of Zionist Jews. And actually, during World War II, this is the real head spinner. The Germans, yes, the German citizens were the targets, not the Jews. Well, some Jews, okay. So, but actually German citizens, because, and then, well, yeah, it gets almost so insane that I'm kind of trying to grapple with it right now. Because I decided that I better record this show today. I'm on pretty slippery ice around here. I've literally got one foot on the ice and the other foot on a banana peel. So, okay, so anyhow, so I was looking at the show and the Sassoon business, and I thought, whoa, wait a minute. Sassoon spread Jews all over the world. That's what happened here. And then I was going to cover in this show the Gypsies. I have had suspicions about the Gypsies for years. The Gypsies are in this picture. So, well, before I was closing off what I thought was the show about the Sassoons spreading these Jews all over the world, and then I was looking into the Gypsies. Well, then I ran into this. The Germans. It was really the Germans. So let me just start reading. I don't know what else to do. So, in World War II, the three biggest war crimes committed by the Zionist powers were this: genocide by collective punishment of over 30 million ethnic German civilians after V-Day. That was 1945, when World War II was officially declared to be over. This attests to a massive Talmudic blood sacrifice. Spoiler alert, Sassoon turns out, and I have more about this in a bit here, Sassoon, of course, is a Zionist. Also, when they said that he was Jewish in the last show, I went looking to find out, well, what kind of Jew was Sassoon? Well, Zionist. Also, Orthodox. You know, the story I told recently about those Orthodox Jews in Israel raping the children, raping the prisoners, all of that stuff. When you're looking for what Jews are the ones you want to focus on as not necessarily very nice Jews, you want to focus on either the word Zionist or Orthodox. So I did, in fact, confirm that Sassoon was Orthodox. So he spread those Orthodox child rapist Jews all over the Middle East at that particular junction of time. So the genocide of all of the ethnic Germans, okay? Number two, the entire saturation firebombing of Germany after 1943, and that was when we were talking about Dresden, remember? Although by then it was very clear that Germany had already lost the war. This again attests to the Talmudic blood sacrifice of German civilians to Moloch. Also, this was a very key point, referring to all Germans as Nazis in Zionist propaganda during and after World War II. Although the Nazis only had about 5.7 million members in 1939, meaning probably less than 8% of the population. So they pretty much just got everybody thinking that all of the Germans were Nazis. The official truth narrative for World War I and World War II was always implausible. And I see here, the architect in chief of the German Holocaust was Edward VII, who was likely 75% Jewish, and whose advisors urged him to launch one war in two stages. Get rid of the Germans for once and for all. And he died in 1910 before his vast German Holocaust even began. Already in 1883, German Chancellor Bismarck launched the world's first social welfare state that promised to create a European workers' paradise. But such noble aims completely flaw in the face of the goals of the Zionist London-New York alliance, which sought and still seeks the total enslavement of mankind. The Germans were selected for special punishment for the temerity they had demonstrated by creating systems and industries serving to free humanity. So in 1871 to 1920, London had this Quaternary Lodge, and they built Nazism, the Nazi ideals. They founded the Thule Society, Thule Society, and then that morphed into the Nazis, and later installed their Illuminati agent, Adolf Hitler, on January 1933 with his book, Mein Kampf, most likely written by Tavistock. And also, I think Mein Kampf is what the MK in MK7 means, but I'll keep reading. World War I and World War II were both religious wars, whose two main aims were to create Israel as the venue for the reign of the Antichrist and to genocide Christians, exactly as the Talmud commands. And I'll be giving you a little bit more information about the Talmud in a bit here. Let me just get through this first article. See, these people, you'll find a lot of this information in periodicals like Jew World Order. These people are not fans of these people. So there'll be all kinds of names they call them, like they call them the Talmudist. What they're really referring to are the Jews, but they have a lot of nicknames for them, which I can certainly understand. I mean, I'm a person who loves nicknames myself. I get why they're calling them names, but I'm just trying to be clear when I read this, that a lot of these, let's say the Jews that didn't get killed, that are wise to these people, that's how they address it, is what I'm trying to say. So they said the Talmudists genocided 65 million Christians in World War I and 85 million Christians in World War II. In the entire 20th century, in mostly religious wars, the Talmudists genocided a total of around 400 million Goyim, which Goyim, which they refer to as livestock, and they call us cattle. Before the Dresden Holocaust, now, I'm seeing Dresden for another reason also, because, I mean, I was looking at places that have gotten destroyed and bombed. There are so many significant places that got ruined through this war, but let me not get distracted here. So, there was a quote from Winston Churchill before the Dresden event. I do not want to receive any suggestions how we can destroy militarily important targets in Dresden's hinterland. I want to get suggestions how we can fry 600,000 refugees from Breslau in Dresden. So there were evidently 600,000 refugees in this place called Breslau. Breslau, and that's what Churchill was talking about, that he wanted them to fry literally fry them to death, which they in fact did. The firebombing is very, I don't want to go, it's very ugly business, okay? The way they swoop those into fire tunnels and stuff. So only a true sadist would do this kind of stuff, is the clear point here. So right there, Churchill's talking about he wants to fry 600,000 refugees from Breslau in Dresden. Don't know. This show is going to be just loaded with questions. So get out your pad and paper, kids, and start taking some notes. So anyway, okay, so in the 7 years from 1945 to 1950, a very conservative estimate for the number of this has got interesting because I talked in the past, remember I did that show about the women in Germany were raped brutally and everybody blamed the Russians. But in fact, it was the Allied troops, the Americans and the Brits, that raped all of those German women. So now this makes even more sense, right? So all those German women, they set up like brothels next to military camps. I just did this show in the last few months about that part of it. So interestingly enough, in order to come up with these numbers, what they found out was that according to very conservative estimates, there were so many illegal abortions in Germany and Austria due to systematic rape, and they claim it might be as many as 12 million. The official stats acknowledge that there were over 2 million illegal abortions per year in Germany in each of the years 45, 46, 47, and 48, totaling over 8 million. So what they were saying is that roughly 1/10 of the population of Germany, so they think it's about 9 million abortions were had. So they went on to say that Red Army eyewitnesses confirmed that roughly 1 in 8 of the German women were actually raped to death. So after World War II, abortion remained broadly illegal throughout both Germany, both West and East Germany. So I don't know why that was, but a lot of the women, interestingly enough, were going into the Netherlands to seek abortions during that time frame. So they say the real reason for the German Holocaust. And remember, World War II has always been called the Good War. I think we need to really readjust our thinking on this one. And remember, back in the, I have to add Sassoon to the timeline over on my website. So I'm just kind of guessing right now, but we're around the same time frame. So they say the real reason for the German Holocaust. As the process of German unification was being finalized in 1866 to 71, Talmudist Edward VII, who was probably 75% Jewish, began hatching his plans for the German Holocaust. His military advisors urged him to plot and launch one war in 2 stages to get rid of Germans for once and for all. The Talmudists, the Zionists, and Freemasons need to lie about history because otherwise the profane slaves, that means us, might at least try to prevent them from getting history to repeat. If history books told the truth that the Zionist powers, meaning U.S., Great Britain, Russia, and France, genocided 37 million ethnic German civilians in the German Holocaust in 1914 to 55, their slaves would at least try to prevent this from ever happening again. But by falsifying history, the Talmudists have done much worse than merely lie. They have actually weaponized history to safeguard their future plans to genocide all Christians, except for 2,800 Gentile slaves for each Talmudist, as it was decreed by the Talmud. So I guess in the Talmud, each Jew was going to be allowed to get 2,800 slaves for each of them. Isn't that nice? This is the very last thing the Talmudists want to prove, Jorge Santana right, because history and genocide would stop repeating for them if the slaves ever learned the truth about history. The falsification and weaponization of history are key tactics for enabling their planned genocide. The 21st century, as is printed in the sermons of many holy rabbis. And this is really crazy because we all had D-Day so launched into our brains as a good thing, right? Today, British and American slaves, that's us, are still taught that Normandy landings were something to be proud of because they produced great Zionist victory. But if those slaves had been told the truth that the Zionist powers genocided 30 million ethnic Germans after V-Day, which was 8 May 1945, humiliating shame would soon replace that pride. The USA has lived under Zionist totalitarianism since 1913, and Britain since 1808, when proto-Zionist Nathan Meyer Rothschild became a financial advisor to the British regime. The Zionists have owned and run the mainstream media of Europe since the 1880s and those of the United States since around 1917. The World War II and post-World War II genocide of Germans is still being kept secret. And I gotta tell you, this one really threw me for a loop. And they quoted Voltaire, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." And the Zionist powers, and keep this in your brain, U.S., Great Britain, Russia, and France. We have symbols of France all around this country. Look up the fleur-de-lis. It's on gates outside the buildings. Yeah, the French are in here. This is the four. The U.S., Great Britain, Russia, and France successfully deployed the myth of German villainy to dupe the brave men of their honorable Zionist militaries into committing by far the greatest crime of the 20th century, which was the genocide of 37 million ethnic German civilians in the German Holocaust. In the 20th century, the Talmudists genocided around 400 million victims. So that's like their death toll to date. They already demonstrated their talents for murder and cover-up. But maybe hellfire will be their final conclusion. I have so many links down below that I'm just going to read them off to you right now. Should you choose to want to look further, I am only barely going to scrape the surface today. I have a short history of the Sassoon family. I found one tiny little clip on YouTube about that. The Sassoon family, the Jewish dynasty who became global merchants. National emblem of the world, invasion of, I found a list of griffins. You also look for heraldry, Heraldy. So I have a list of griffins as mascots. Mascots, like schools and stuff, griffins are really pretty huge. Okay, also, if you want to look further, now I don't think these lists are going to be complete, but I found quite a few things as starters to take a look at because somebody on Wikipedia did buildings destroyed by the bombings of Tokyo, because I think it's important to look at all these places that got bombed, what was really going on there, right? And that UNESCO is the one who's hiding a lot of this old history. Also, I started looking a little bit into Wuhan. Why'd they bomb Wuhan? They say it was the 10 most beautiful old buildings, and then also more about the Opium Wars. And then I spun into the Gypsies. Yeah, the Gypsies. Actually, there's a lot to these Gypsies. But after I did the Gypsies, then I found this Holocaust stuff. So I put the Gypsies at the bottom because in the middle, I have a million notes that I want to go over with you today. So anyhow, so I have all kinds of other stuff about the genocide of millions of Germans, Zionism and wars, the massive hidden Holocaust of German citizens, the Jewish betrayal of Germany and the cause of World War II. And also, there's a lot of proof that 6 million Jews did not die in World War II like we were told. So, also, I have more about this firebombing of Wuhan, World Heritage, and those are places to take further looks into. Okay, so now it's pretty clear to me that the purpose of Sassoon left Turkey, went over to India, spread Zionists all over the place. Next, all of a sudden, we have World War I, right? And then they have the chopping up of the Middle East. Okay. Oh, before I get started, I'd like to tell you about they're over there bombing Lebanon right now. Well, since we've been talking about stolen history, what are they bombing? The ancient city of Tyre, Tyre. Tyre is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world and home to important archaeological sites. And also, it's on the South Coastal City. They're really blowing up around coastal cities all around the world. Like poor people in different parts of Asia that have lived next to those waters their whole generation after generation. Well, those people are getting shoved off everywhere, all around the world to put up expensive condos and places. Who's going to live in those places is a mystery to me, but I'll keep reading. So this, what was it saying here? Says, as the old saying goes, who during World War II actually got holocausted? Was it the Germans, in particular civilians? Were well over 1 million white people. So yeah, that's the other interesting thing is that they were all white people in the Hellstorm bombing campaigns and they were roasted alive by fire. Or was it the Jews and their phony Holocaust narrative, where their description isn't even accurate because they claim to have been gassed to death with diesel exhaust and bug poison, then cremated, not burned sacrificially, unlike the Germans who were ritually murdered by Holocaust, i.e., burnt offerings, sacrificing of animals. Again, another case of the Jews flipping the storyline. And this is a pretty big flipping of the storyline, if you ask me. I absolutely did not see this one coming, or I would have told you a long time ago. And there's this, what I did was I also clipped out some interesting things that started this whole thing off. There was a scientist, Frederick Linderman. He was Churchill's Minister of Defense and lifelong friend of Einstein. He was educated in Germany and used his contacts to arrange an early exodus for selected German scientists, many who became prominent in the research in the US and UK regarding the Jew. Now, this is just too much. So when they knew this was happening, and this Linderman person will come up again here. So, and you'll have to excuse me. In order to communicate, I have the microphone about less than an inch from my lips. So if I can't start smacking around, I'm not trying to kiss you. That would be a kiss. Okay, so let me get this straight. Linderman was Churchill's Minister of Defense and lifelong friend of Einstein. Was educated in Germany. I just love these turnabout stories, right? That's what we're dealing with now. People who are all turned against the rest of us. So I'll call him Turncoat Linderman. So scientist Turncoat Frederick Linderman, he used his contacts to arrange an early exodus. These people are such cowards. They're cowards all the way through. The name of a psychopath right next to their definition, they should put their word fucking cowards. They're such cowards. They always got to run and hide. But I'll keep reading and try to pull myself back into the rain here, if that's possible. Okay, so he arranged for an early exodus for selected German scientists, many who became prominent in the research in the US and UK regarding the Jewish bombings of Germany. Nothing like putting the cat in the hot seat, is it? No, what is that? The wolf and the chicken hatch? Once Linderman, or once Turncoat Linderman became Churchill's key scientific advisor, few, if any, insiders had greater influence. Excuse me. Linderman, or Turncoat Linderman, wrote and circulated the paper that first advocated heavily bombing civilian residential neighborhoods in German cities, convinced that making large numbers of German civilians homeless or dead would undermine the enemy's morale. Linderman's homicidal plans were quickly adopted by Churchill. Linderman was made Lord Cherwell in 1941 and created Viscount of Cherwell in 1956. It was said that he had almost a pathological hatred of Germans and a medieval desire for revenge, tantamount to that of Roosevelt's advisor, Jew Henry Morgenthau. You're going to hear a lot about this Henry Morgenthau here. So they actually, it goes on to say, the sole Jewish intention of destroying Berlin's working class districts, what they did was they hooked up this plan, and they came up with these villages. And they said, meticulously duplicating the aging and specific gravity of older German construction. After exhaustively researching factors such as roof area coverage critical to an incendiary parameter of target neighborhoods in Berlin, the fire experts and architects even simulated the effect Berlin rain might have on combustibility. RKO duplicated the typical interiors and furniture of Berlin's working class households right down to their linen, bedding, toys, drapes, and bedside Bibles. Wood similar to that used in Germany was specifically imported from Russia to experiment with. They were experimenting the best methods of destroying real German cities. They were using napalm, the same M69 napalm which the USA dutifully supplied to the RAF for their Jewish terror bombing of German towns. Gas and anthrax and incendiary bombs were all used against the fake German village, and it had to be rebuilt several times. The success of their diabolical Jewish planning later proved lethal, and German women and children paid the price. So this gives us a real first. They were actually firebombing a fake German village to understand how horrible it would be. Only a single block of the original village is left today to bear witness to the combined Jewish forces of Hollywood, the oil industry, and dedicated workers who, with great financial resources at their disposal, feverishly abetted the Jewish mass murder of around 1 million German civilians. The heinous Jewish nature of this planned extermination took place on all levels. So this gives us a real first because they obviously, now I know supposedly over when Oppenheimer was testing those bombs, they also had houses and stuff set up that they filmed supposedly getting hit with bombs. But I'm pretty sure that that test and those houses were not real because when I looked into it a few years ago, and I'm just going from a really rough memory, the houses they put up here to test for bombs, they photographed it, and I believe all that photography was being sent to Lookout Mountain in California, and that's where they got all of those photos ready. So when Japan hit, they already had photos of that big plume explosion. So this is very interesting because when I was looking into the bombing of houses they supposedly did here, I'm just going from memory. There was a lot of details which led me to believe that those houses really weren't tested, that was just a fake deal. It had to do with the way the wind was blowing and stuff like that. So it's interesting to find out that they did not test on those homes here before World War II, but they did this incredibly detailed testing of German homes, right? So where was I here? So let me just keep reading here. Dugway itself, historically shrouded in official Jewish secrecy. So, the heinous Jewish nature of this planned extermination took place on all levels. The American counterpart to Churchill's cold-blooded advisor, Frederick Linderman, or Lord Cherwell, was Franklin Roosevelt's close friend and advisor, Jew Henry Morgenthau. His plan to demilitarize Germany involved disarming all Germans, destruction of all war material, including old monuments, severe punishment for war crimes, a total ban on any uniforms, including scouting, a prohibition of parades, plus the disabling of all military bands and destruction of any military music, past or present. Wow, they were pretty intent on getting rid of the Germans now, weren't they? They also went on to say they were going to get rid of all aircraft, including gliders, military or commercial, were to be confiscated, and no German was to be permitted to operate or help operate any aircraft anywhere. He wanted the policing of Germany and the civil administration in Germany to be assumed with severity by Germany's former foes. Instead of reparations, the Jew Morgenthau wanted global confiscation of all German assets, with Germany partitioned into harmless pastoral units, while Germans were sent as slaves to rebuild the countries of her former enemies. He did not want Germany rebuilt, but to remain impotent and dependent on handouts to live as a dog is dependent on its master, so as to break the will of the people. The Jew Morgenthau urged that all equipment be removed from mines and the mines closed. All German schools and universities closed until a Judeo-Allied re-education program was in place to brainwash the Germans and all German radio stations and newspapers, magazines, weeklies, etc., discontinued until these policies were established. He wanted all large estates broken up and divided among the peasants. Roosevelt publicly shelved the Morgenthau Plan, but only after its exposure in the media caused concern. However, it permeated the Jewish American administration and influenced every single aspect of subsequent Allied planning. Large groups of male German POWs were sent into slavery as forced workers abroad and kept as long as possible. German adults and children underwent Jewish re-education and experienced intentional starvation. And remember, I did that show about Germany in the last couple of years. I was so upset during that whole show about how they held food back from the German people, but this exactly is why. So the German adults and children underwent Jewish re-education and experienced intentional starvation. There was a Jewish redistribution of wealth, and German lands in the East were given to the Judeo-communists, and there was a revenge-seeking war crimes trial at Nuremberg. Full Jewish censorship was instituted, and there was Jewish destruction of German books, art, and cultural monuments. In November 1945, General Kike, they love these slang, Kike, K-I-K-E, Eisenhower, as military governor of the U.S. occupation zone, approved the distribution to American military officials in Germany of 1,000 free copies of Jew Morgenthau's book, Germany is Our Problem, in which his plan was laid out. And Morgenthau himself stated, the Morgenthau Plan for Germany became part of the Potsdam Agreement, a solemn declaration of Jewish policy and understanding for action signed by the United States of America, Great Britain, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Well, alrighty there, they're all in on it. The Judeo allies harvested all German technologies and scientific achievements they found, and they farmed out thousands of the brightest German researchers as Jewish slaves to the Soviet Union. Britain and the USA also got these German researchers. The Jewish victors confiscated intellectual property of immense value, including all German patents, both in Germany and abroad, which they turned around and licensed to Judeo-allied companies. The intellectual reparation taken by the U.S., Britain, and the Soviets amounted to billions and billions of dollars. I wonder if this has to do with the story of, supposedly the story goes that the Bushes, hiding as a Sherpers, became the bookkeepers for Tesla, and then they stole his patent. Don't know. But anyways, I'll keep reading here. Germany was meanwhile reduced to less than the standard of life it had known at the height of the Great Depression in 1932, and reduced to a smaller size than she was in the year 1125. This led to millions more unnecessary civilian deaths from starvation and disease in the first couple of years after the war. And this is where I came in with that story a couple of years ago. Despite widespread starvation, American military personnel and their wives were given strict orders to destroy or otherwise render inedible their own leftover surplus so as to ensure it could not be eaten by German civilians. a policy in U.S. zones throughout all of Germany. The Kaufman Plan was set forth in a nasty, neurotic little Jewish book called Germany Must Perish, which suggested the castration of all fertile German men over 16 years of age and importing foreigners to Germany to alter the ethnic base. While this Jewish idea might be considered the work of a crank, other plans for Germans were developed by more respectable conventional sources. There was this plan called the Houghton Plan. It was conjured up by a clan of Harvard intellectuals led by anthropology professor Albert Houghton. In a newspaper article titled Breed War Strain Out of Germany, published January 1943, Houghton suggested various genetic manipulations which would destroy German nationalism and aggressive ideology, including sentencing German males to a lifetime of slavery abroad while foreign men occupied Germany long enough to impregnate German women and pollute the German gene pool. For a period of 20 years or more, utilize the bulk of the present German army as rehabilitation labor units in devastated areas of Allied nations and elsewhere. Millions of German men were indeed sent into slavery abroad, while German women remained at home as fair game. And then when I was scanning the comments, this one person made quite a good comment. A person named Ulrich from a few years ago, he said, "Oh, the fucking irony. England and America, home of the benign birth ran Masonic murderers, having the gall to want to breed the war strain out of Germans. Yet England had subjugated a large portion of the world over the preceding 300 years with multiple bloody massacres in its Anglo-Jewish partnership of murder, theft, and occupation. Fucking hypocrites. The American government since its inception are as corrupt as their British Jew counterparts and have forced democracy down the throats of much of the modern world. And they have the audacity to scream bloody murder at the Germans, whom they still occupy to this day." Also, I ran into a piece that, the death number of 6 million is what we keep hearing as far as the millions of Jews that were supposedly slaughtered, right? Well, I'm not going to read every word of this, but some pretty smart people have put this together, and they say objective calculations do not exceed 1.5 million. So they say that, again, as for all other groups in this war, many, many persons disappeared for different reasons. 1.5 million missed Jews. That's much, much too much indeed. Too much to be quadrupled without a reason and without proof. So yeah, they went through all the numbers, and I read it all, and they did their work. But yeah, a lot of these people, they say it can't be 6,000. And then I found this quote. It says, "For one, it involves the treachery of the Zionist Jews in betraying Germany, which had been a rather happy home for the Jews, and scheming to obtain Palestine in trade for that betrayal. For another, few people seem aware that the Jews openly declared a worldwide war on Germany well before the Second World War, the economic consequences of which were quite severe. The stated intention by organizing a worldwide boycott of all German goods was to destroy Germany's economy and starve to death 1/3 of Germany's population as punishment for refusing to bow to a Jewish ultimatum to fire Hitler and to reinstate all Jews to their former government positions. Jews cannot escape the accusation that they themselves were responsible for the resentment within Germany against their own people. And then I found there was this 1938 headline that said UK newspaper boss writes that Jewish influence may drive Britain into war with Germany. Went on to say there are 20,000 German Jews in England in the professions pursuing research. They all work against an accommodation with Germany. In a subsequent letter, he said further, the Jews have got a big position in the press here. At last, I am shaken. The Jews may drive us into war. And also, there was this saying that briefly Germany was offering England a negotiated peace on what the lawyers called a status quo ante basis. That means let's call the war off and let everything be as it was before the war. England in the summer of 1916 had no choice. It was to either accept this negotiated peace that Germany was magnanimously offering them or go on with the war and being totally defeated. While that was going on, the Zionists in Germany, who represented the Zionists from Eastern Europe, went to the British War Cabinet and they said, look here, you can yet win this war. You don't have to give up. You don't have to accept the negotiated peace offered to you by Germany. You can win this war if the United States will come in as your ally. Ding, ding, ding. This gives us a starting point, right? So, the Zionists in Germany, who also represented Zionists from Eastern Europe, told the Brits, look, you can win this war. Get the U.S. as your ally. And they went on to say, the price you must pay is Palestine. After you have won the war and defeated Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Turkey. Now, England had as much right to promise Palestine to anybody as the United States would to promise Japan to Ireland for any reason whatsoever. It is absolutely absurd that Great Britain, that never had any connection or any interest or any right in what is known as Palestine, should offer it as coin of the realm to pay the Zionists for bringing the United States into the war. However, they did make that promise in October of 1916. And shortly after that, I don't know how many here remember it, the United States, which was almost totally pro-German, entered the war as Britain's ally. The Jews at that peace conference, when they were cutting up Germany and parceling out Europe to all these nations who claimed a right to a certain part of European territory, they all said, how about Palestine for us? And they produced, for the first time to the knowledge of the Germans, this Balfour Declaration. So the Germans, for the first time, realized why the United States came into the war. The Germans, for the first time, realized that they had been defeated and suffered the terrific reparations that were slapped on them because the Zionists wanted Palestine and were determined to get it at any cost. This person tells us up until that time, the Jews had never been better off in any country in the world than they had been in Germany. But you can imagine that when the Germans realized what had happened, how they had been set up and betrayed, they naturally resented it. This would be one reason Germans might have felt antipathy for the Jews. The Jews tried to keep a lid on this fact. They didn't want the world to really understand that they had sold out Germany and that the Germans resented that. The Germans then took discriminatory action against the Jews and shunned them. So I think the Germans seem to have a pretty good reason, right? The same way we would shun the Chinese or the Negroes or the Catholics or anyone in this country who had sold us out to an enemy and brought about our defeat. Now we get interesting. Where'd they call the meeting? Well, Amsterdam. After a while, the Jews of the world called a meeting in Amsterdam. Jews from every country in the world attended this meeting in July of 1933. And I can imagine by July of 1933, I mean, Sassoon had been out there, building synagogues and schools and funneling all these Jews into rich positions with all that opium money. So let me see. So the meeting was in July of 1933, and they said to Germany, you fire Hitler and you put every Jew back into his former position, whether he was a communist or no matter what he was. You can't treat us that way. And we, the Jews of the world, are serving an ultimatum upon you. You can imagine what the Germans told them. So what did the Jews do? The world's Jews declared war on Germany with mass demonstrations, boycotts, and more. It may be one of the biggest secrets of World War II that just before the war began, the leadership of the world Jewish community formally declared war on Germany. So even before World War II, the world Jewish community, they had already declared war on Germany. This was above and beyond the ongoing 6-year-long economic boycott launched by the worldwide Jewish community when the Nazi Party came into power in 1933. As a consequence of this formal declaration of war, Germany thus deemed Jews to be potential enemy agents. Well, yes, it makes sense to me, right? And they went on to say, I wish to confirm in the most explicit manner the declaration which I and my colleagues have made during the last month that the Jews stand behind Great Britain. Our urgent desire is to give effect to these declarations against Germany. We are going to starve them into surrender. We are going to use a worldwide boycott against them. That will destroy them because they are dependent upon their export business. This was neither the first nor the last time the U.S. government willingly sacrificed the lives of its own citizens and military personnel to obtain justification for a war that had no justification. The U.S. military destroyed the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, killing hundreds of its own men as an excuse to blame the Cubans and declare war on Spain. For many decades, the official explanation was that the source of the explosion was unknown, but eventually the truth emerged. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was essentially the same. The U.S. had complete intelligence on the Japanese fleet and knew precisely its location and the expected time of attack. but refused to warn its base in Pearl Harbor and sacrificed thousands of American lives for the sake of having an excuse to enter World War II on behalf of the Jewish Zionists in Europe. And once again, for many decades, the truth was suppressed. But finally, today, there is undeniable confirmed evidence that U.S. sacrificed thousands of its own citizens as an excuse to declare another war. We will force this war upon Hitler if he wants it or not. This war is an English war, and its goal is the destruction of Germany, said Winston Churchill. You must understand that this war is not against Hitler or National Socialism, but against the strength of the German people, which is to be smashed once and for all, regardless of whether it is in the hands of Hitler or a Jesuit priest, says Winston Churchill in 1940. And here was I see. I'm trying to figure out. Not going to figure it out today, likely, but why those people in Germany? Here was another quote: "The face, excuse me, the race struggle is the primal one, and the class struggle secondary. The last dominating race is the German. Yet it seems that a final race struggle is unavoidable." And this is where it gets really strange. Okay, this is another article. Germany and Japan had a treaty under which if either Germany or Japan were attacked by a third power, the country which was not attacked by the third power automatically is at war with that third power. Well, that's exactly how NATO is now set up. So President Roosevelt, the guy that got the money from the Opium Wars, I wonder if he was really crippled or not. I probably shouldn't be making jokes about it in case he was, but hey, do I really wonder if Roosevelt was crippled? That'd be a pretty good act, right? Hang around his wheelchair part of the time, about dancing on the ballroom floor the other time. I wouldn't put anything past these people. Okay, so they had that deal. Germany and Japan had that deal. So President Roosevelt planned to provoke Japan so Japan would attack the United States. So Japan in December 1941 attacked Pearl Harbor. So then the U.S. immediately declared war against Japan and was at war with Germany. The personal diary of the Honorable Henry Stimson, he was like the war guy in Roosevelt's cabinet or something like that. It said, the personal diary of Henry Stimson and all his papers are in Yale University Library. Mr. Stimson each day entered in his personal diary in his own handwriting the important events in his life that day. Mr. Stimson was President Roosevelt's Secretary of Defense. Mr. Stimson's diary was introduced as evidence in the United States Senate investigation of the Pearl Harbor attack by Japan over the strong objection of friends of President Roosevelt. Mr. Stimson entered in his diary on November the 25th, 1941, 2 weeks before Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, and he said that a meeting with President Roosevelt and his cabinet that morning at the White House, President Roosevelt told those present that he wished to be at war against Japan, but that he did not want it to appear that the United States fired the first shot. So, I don't know, I guess everything is a plot, right? And then there were a lot of headlines that I looked at too to make people believe this 6,000 number. They said things like, there are 6,000 living, bleeding, suffering arguments in favor of Zionism. So, yeah, so they were arguing in June 1900 that all of these bleeding, suffering people are in favor of why people should want Zionism. Another title, 6 million Jews are homeless. 2/5 of all jewelry, nearly 6,000 men, women, and children were butchered to death. And that was from some rabbi in 1945. And this Samuel Untermeyer, a prominent New York attorney, was one of the leading agitators in the war against Germany, describing the Jewish campaign as nothing less than a holy war. The worldwide Jewish leadership became even more belligerent and worked itself into a frenzy. An international Jewish boycott conference was held in Amsterdam to coordinate the ongoing boycott campaign. It was held under the auspices of the self-styled World Jewish Economic Federation, of which famous New York City attorney, this Samuel Untermeyer, got elected president. So then this Untermeyer goes around making some pretty crazy statements, and he called for a sacred war against Germany, making a flat-out allegation that Germany was engaged in a plan to exterminate the Jews. He said, in part, Germany has been converted from a nation of culture into a veritable hell of cruel and savage beasts. Well, that's kind of sounding more like the United States, right? A nation of culture into a veritable hell of cruel and savage beasts. We owe it to not only to our persecuted brethren, but to the entire world to now strike in self-defense a blow that will free humanity from a repetition of this incredible outrage. Now or never shall all the nations of the world make common cause against these slaughter, salvation, starvation, and annihilation, fiendish torture, cruelty, and persecution that are being inflicted day by day upon these men, women, and children. When the tale is told, the world will confront a picture so fearful in its barbarous cruelty that the hell of war and the alleged Belgian atrocities pale into significance as compared to this devilish, deliberately cold-blooded plan and already partially executed campaign for the extermination of a proud, gentle, loyal, law-abiding people. The Jews are the aristocrats of the world. From time to immemorial time, they have been persecuted and have seen their persecutors come and go. They alone have survived, and so history will repeat itself, but that furnishes no reason or fails to rescue those 600,000 human souls from the tortures of hell. So I don't know what everybody's talking about here, but what they did was this. These lawyers got involved, and this Untermeyer person then proceeded to provide his listeners with a wholly fraudulent history of the circumstances of the German boycott and how it originated. He also proclaimed that the Germans were bent on a plan to exterminate the Jews. Shortly before President Wilson's re-election, he received a Jewish visitor in the White House, this Samuel Untermeyer, the attorney. The Jew Untermeyer was a prominent New York City attorney of the law firm Guggenheim, Untermeyer, and Marshall. The firm had one of its main clients, Kuhn Loeb Bank, of which Jacob Schiff. Now, I think this Jacob Schiff is the same Schiff that was supposedly a Bush, but I'm a little bit fuzzy, so just let me keep reading. So this firm, meaning this firm that Jew Untermeyer has, the firm had as one of its main clients Kuhn Loeb Bank, of which Jacob Schiff, as an agent of Walter Rothschild, was the head. Both Untermeyer and Schiff contributed generously to the National Democratic Committee that installed President Wilson in the White House in both of his elections. Untermeyer informed President Wilson that he had been retained to bring a breach of promise action against President Wilson. See, what they're doing here is what they're doing right now, blackmail, right? I'll keep reading here. So anyway, this Untermeyer informs President Wilson that he had been retained to bring a breach of promise action against President Wilson. Untermeyer's client was the former wife of a professor at Princeton University at the same time that Wilson was a professor at Princeton University. Untermeyer informed Wilson that his client was willing to accept $40,000 in lieu of commencing the breach of promise action. Untermeyer produced a packet of letters from his pocket written by President Wilson to his colleague's wife when they were neighbors at Princeton University. These letters established the fact that an illicit relationship had existed between Wilson and the wife of his Princeton colleague. Wilson immediately acknowledged his authorship of the letters. Untermeyer then informed Wilson that his former sweetheart was in dire need of $40,000. President Wilson informed Untermeyer that he did not have the $40,000 to pay his blackmailer. Untermeyer then volunteered to give Wilson's former sweetheart the $40,000 out of his own pocket, but on one condition: that President Wilson promised to appoint the first vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court and to appoint the Zionist and Talmudic Jew Louis Brandeis. Without further talk, President Wilson accepted Mr. Untermeyer's generous offer. Then, on June the 5th, 1916, nearly 1 year before Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany, Wilson appointed Zionist Jew Louis Brandeis to the Supreme Court. Many were surprised that Wilson, the son of a Christian minister, would appoint to the highest court in the land the first Jewish Supreme Court justice in U.S. history. President Wilson and Justice Brandeis became unusually intimate friends. Brandeis knew the circumstances behind his appointment by President Wilson, and Wilson feared him because of it. So I am going to be putting this on hold. This gets me to the point of what I was going to talk about today. But before, let me see if I can cover a little bit more now. So that's what's going on with Germany, that trick. I also will be talking later about these photos that these Tartaria people look over. They're always talking about, oh, look, there's nobody on the streets. The streets are empty. Well, it could be a couple of reasons. One is if you overexpose your film. I hate to be a genius, but if you overexpose your film, people will disappear. The other is that maybe they wanted the film to be overexposed so they wouldn't show black faces on the streets, right? They've talked in the past during these trauma events that they do where they murder and eat babies and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes these places are located, if you're looking to find out about more buried history, look around cemeteries. Cemeteries are a great place to bury things. They also have crematoriums. I've read many cases where they were using those to destroy evidence. And this brings me to my point. I talked in the past about how this country was set up. We got a preacher, a sheriff, and a doctor for each area, right? I think they were modeling it early on. How did they get China? Well, the missionaries became natural allies of the smugglers. So the Sassoon people got close to the missionaries. When they first arrived on the coast of China, they docked among opium traders on the island of Linton. So these missionaries just happened to be there, right? I'm telling you, this whole religious thing, but I'll keep going here. So just like they sent missionaries around the world to make people who give up their customs, right? Oh, give up that healing custom. Let me give you a pill. Take this pill. Okay, so this is how it happened there. What they did was this. The missionaries became natural allies of the smugglers. When they first arrived on the coast of China, they docked among the opium traders on the island of Linton. They interpreted for them in exchange for passages up the coast. They distributed tracts while the drugs were taken onshore. And in the Chinese repository's leading English language publication, they shared a forum for spreading their views on the urgent need to open China by whatever means necessary. In the 1890s, Singapore's Jewish merchants began reinvesting their profits in stocks and property. So, and all of these traders were Orthodox Jews. The Sassoon's family philanthropic endeavors extended to numerous charitable organizations, Torah schools, and relief funds, and even the establishment of a hospital and clinics. The family also made significant contributions to their Zionist and religious institutions in the land of Israel, including regularly supporting the Jewish settlement in Hebron in the 1920s. So they were over there, and I'm going to have to put this on hold. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and upload this now, and I have just a ton more to go over. I still have to get to the part here of how the pilgrims, and then I also have to get to the part about the gypsies. The gypsies are literally a division of the Jews. Those gypsies. Yeah, the gypsies connect with the Jews. And but anyway, I need to be more rested to go into this next phase here. So I will chat with you when I can. Goodbye for now. Be safe out there.